There are moments in life that happen so suddenly, they leave us teetering on the edge of bewilderment, unsure of what to do or how to process what's unfolding. Such a moment happened to me on a Thursday evening. The house was eerily quiet. My husband had left for a business trip earlier that week, leaving me alone to face the vast emptiness and silence that stretched endlessly. In an attempt to ease the loneliness, I decided to take some time for myself, to close the door, embrace the privacy, and seek some relaxation in the stillness. But just as I began to unwind, the sharp click of the front door broke through the silence. The sudden sound startled me, the light from the hallway spilling into the room. I froze, speechless, as a wave of insecurity, shame, and embarrassment swept over me. That moment marked the beginning of a story I never expected to unfold. My name is Olivia. I'm 30 years old and living a life many might consider perfect. My husband Henry is a successful executive at a major corporation. To the outside world, our life seems ideal: a beautiful home, a stable future, and a love story that others dream of. But behind the scenes, beneath the polished surface, there are hidden cracks that no one else sees. Henry is a man dedicated to his work. Since the day we married, I've become accustomed to his frequent absences, long business trips, endless meetings, and late nights spent at the office. I understand his ambition and the sacrifices he makes for our future. In the beginning, I admired his drive. Every time he returned home, his love and gentle gestures were enough to fill the void his absences left behind. But as the years passed, the pace of our life began to shift. Henry's work consumed him more and more. The days he spent at home grew fewer, and even when he was present, his mind seemed preoccupied with the weight of his responsibilities. I knew he was doing his best, and I tried to be supportive, but the growing emptiness in our marriage was undeniable. Our intimacy, once a source of connection, began to fade. Henry, being older than me, struggled with his health, and as much as I tried to suppress my feelings, I couldn't ignore the frustration and longing building within me. The house, without him, felt colder and emptier with each passing day. I filled my time with yoga, shopping, and classes, but these distractions only worked temporarily. At night, as I lay alone in bed, the silence became unbearable, and the weight of my loneliness pressed heavily on me. I didn't dare voice these feelings to Henry. I knew it would hurt him, and the last thing I wanted was to add to his burdens. But that silence created a distance between us, one that felt impossible to bridge. When Henry told me his stepson, William, would be returning from abroad, I wasn't sure how to feel. William was 27 years old, only a few years younger than me, and the son from Henry's previous marriage. I had never met him before, as he'd spent most of his life studying and working overseas. Henry always spoke of William with pride, and their father-son relationship seemed strong despite the distance. The day William arrived, the house felt different. He was tall, handsome, and carried himself with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. His polite demeanor and humor quickly filled the quiet spaces in our home, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the house felt alive. Family meals became more vibrant. The usual silence was replaced with laughter, often sparked by William's stories of his life abroad. His presence was a breath of fresh air, easing the loneliness I had grown so used to. William often helped me around the house, his actions thoughtful and kind, and I began to look forward to his company. But then, something happened that changed everything. One evening, after dinner, I went to take a shower, hoping to relax before bed. I didn't bother locking the bathroom door, assuming William was still in the living room. As I stepped out of the shower, a towel loosely wrapped around me, the door suddenly opened. William stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of us moved. In my panic, I reached for the towel, but my fumbling caused it to slip from my grasp. Time seemed to stretch as we both stared, stunned. William's face turned bright red, and he quickly turned away, stammering an apology. I I didn't know you were here. I'm so sorry." He slammed the door shut, leaving me standing there, trembling with embarrassment and confusion. I hurriedly wrapped myself back in the towel, my heart racing. After that night, things between us shifted. William avoided eye contact whenever we were in the same room, and I couldn't bring myself to look at him either. The air between us grew heavy with unspoken tension, yet despite the awkwardness, I found my thoughts drifting back to that moment again and again. I blamed myself for not being careful, but there was something else, something I didn't want to admit. The memory of William's startled expression, his gaze lingering just a fraction too long, left an impression I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just an accident, that things would return to normal, but they didn't. Instead, I found myself paying more attention to him. Every time he passed by, my heart beat faster. I hated myself for it, for the thoughts creeping into my mind, but I couldn't seem to stop. William, too, seemed to be struggling. He kept his distance, his words more careful, his movements deliberate. Yet there were fleeting moments when I caught him watching me, his expression unreadable. Then, Henry announced another business trip, leaving William and me alone in the house for a week. I told myself it was just like before, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. One afternoon, I asked William to help me fix a cabinet in my bedroom. I didn't need the help. It was an excuse to have him near. I chose my outfit carefully, something casual yet deliberately revealing. As he worked on the cabinet, I stood close, occasionally brushing against him or leaning just a bit too close. William kept his composure, but I noticed the subtle tension in his movements. When he finished, he stood up quickly, creating distance between us. "Is there anything else you need?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. I shook my head, trying to mask my disappointment. He left the room without another glance, and I sat there, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Every night, when Henry called to check in, I put on a cheerful voice, pretending everything was fine. But as soon as the call ended, I was left alone with the turmoil in my heart. The boundaries I had once held so firmly were beginning to blur, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, I couldn't deny the growing pull I felt toward William. He too seemed to be fighting his own internal battle. He became quieter, his interactions with me more reserved, but I couldn't ignore the moments when our eyes met, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. And then, one night, everything changed. The night that changed everything began like any other. Henry was still away, and the house was quiet save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. After dinner, William retreated to his room, and I stayed in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but unable to focus on anything. My thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the growing tension between us. The looks, the avoidance, the unspoken words. I told myself to stop, to go to bed and forget these thoughts. But instead, I found myself standing outside William's door, my hand hovering over the wood. I didn't know what I was doing or what I would say if he opened it. Before I could think better of it, I knocked. There was a pause, and then his voice came from the other side, cautious. "Yes?" "It's me," I said softly. "Can I come in?" Another pause, longer this time. Then the door creaked open, and there he was, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and something else I couldn't quite place. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his tone careful. "Yes," I replied, stepping inside. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light a small lamp on the bedside table. I couldn't sleep. William didn't respond immediately. He stepped aside to let me in, closing the door gently behind me. I could feel his tension, the way he kept a deliberate distance between us. I sat down on the edge of his bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I've been meaning to talk to you," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "About what?" His voice was low, almost hesitant. "About what happened," I said, glancing up at him. "In the bathroom." His jaw tightened, and he looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't have to bring it up. It was an accident. I didn't mean—" "I know," I interrupted. "I know it was an accident, but it changed something, didn't it?" He didn't answer, but the way his shoulders tensed told me he knew exactly what I meant. "I've felt it," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "This thing between us, and I don't know what to do about it." "Olivia," he began, but his voice trailed off. He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "We shouldn't be talking about this." "Why not?" I asked, standing now, closing the distance between us. "It's the truth, isn't it? We've both felt it. I know you have." He took a step back, but the small room left little space for retreat. "You're married," he said, his voice strained, "to my father." "I know," I said, my heart pounding, "and I love him, but I can't deny what I feel when I'm around you. Can you?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The tension between us crackled like electricity, and I could see the conflict warring within him. "I don't want to hurt him," William said finally, his voice barely audible. "Neither do I," I replied, my voice breaking. "But I can't keep pretending this doesn't exist. Can you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed the remaining space between us, his hand brushing against mine. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, and before I knew it, his lips were on mine, hesitant at first, as though testing the waters, then more certain as I responded. Time seemed to stand still as the kiss deepened, years of restraint and unspoken longing pouring into that single moment. It was as if all the walls we had built to keep our feelings at bay came crashing down, leaving nothing but raw emotion in their wake. When we finally pulled away, both of us breathing heavily, reality came rushing back. "We can't," William said, his voice filled with both regret and longing. "I know," I whispered, tears pricking the corners of my eyes, "but I don't know how to stop." Neither of us moved for what felt like an eternity, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily between us. I knew we had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances, fleeting touches, and a tension that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Neither of us spoke about that night, but the memory lingered, unspoken yet ever present. And though I knew the path we were on was dangerous, I couldn't bring myself to turn back. It was a Thursday night, almost a week since Henry went on a business trip. The small house felt quieter than ever. The stillness was suffocating. Even the faintest sounds, like the wind brushing past the windows, seemed amplified. Yet this quiet did not bring peace. Instead, it felt like a smoldering fire, burning away at me, making the emptiness within unbearable. Since I got married, I had never experienced this kind of loneliness. Henry's business trips weren't new, but this time the distance felt deeper. Not just physical, but emotional too. I lay on the bed, trying to close my eyes and sleep, but the ache in my heart and the longing in my body refused to let me rest. It wasn't just the quiet that got to me. It was the hollow void that seemed to echo louder than silence itself. Desperation crept in, and I realized that I could no longer bear this emptiness. A bold thought crossed my mind. Before I could stop myself, I reached for the phone on the bedside table. My fingers hesitated over the screen as I searched for movies, ones I knew could momentarily relieve the ache growing inside me. I told myself it was just a distraction, just a way to feel something, anything other than the gnawing loneliness. Lying back, I allowed myself to get lost in the images on the screen. Slowly, my feelings grew more intense, and I felt my body relax into the moment. I was so caught up in the sensations that I forgot one crucial thing. I hadn't locked the bedroom door. Perhaps deep down, I didn't care anymore. My thoughts were consumed, my emotions overwhelming every shred of rationality. Just as the feelings reached their peak, the door to the room suddenly creaked open. The sound cut through my haze like a blade. My eyes flew open in shock, and I froze. There, in the doorway, stood William. His figure was illuminated by the hallway light, his face painted with a mixture of shock and confusion. For a moment, neither of us moved. Time seemed to stand still as our gazes locked. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to pull the blanket over my exposed body, my heart racing faster than it ever had before. I'm sorry," William stammered, his voice thick with embarrassment. His eyes darted downward, refusing to meet mine. Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and shut the door behind him, leaving me alone with the chaos of my emotions. When the door closed, I sat motionless, trembling with a mix of shame, fear, and something I couldn't yet name. My body remained still, but inside, I was spiraling. Suddenly, the door opened again. Before I could compose myself, William stepped back into the room. This time, there was a new look in his eyes, a mixture of determination and hesitation. "William, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaky. I sat there frozen, clutching the blanket to my chest as William stood at the door. The dim light from the hallway framed him, his expression unreadable. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words, his hand brushing nervously through his hair. I shouldn't have walked in on you," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "But I can't stop thinking about you." His words hit me like a jolt. I wanted to say something, to tell him to leave, but my voice betrayed me. The truth was, I had felt the same pull, the same forbidden desire that I had tried so hard to bury. "William?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "You need to go." This isn't right. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "If this is wrong, tell me you don't feel the same," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I couldn't. I looked down, my hands gripping the blanket tightly, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words that would send him away. "Olivia," he said softly, taking another step closer. "If you want me to leave, just tell me, and I will." Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every part of me screamed that I needed to stop this. But when I looked up into his eyes, I couldn't do it. The tension that had been building for weeks, the unspoken connection between us, it was too much to deny. Before I could think or say anything, he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, soft and hesitant at first, as though he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my body betraying the guilt and fear that fought to hold me back. The blanket slipped from my shoulders as his arms wrapped around me, pulling me into him. His touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. I felt his hands moving, exploring, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. His lips trailed from mine to my neck, igniting something deep within me that I couldn't control. My hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer, and as our bodies pressed together, all sense of right and wrong seemed to vanish. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about consequences or the lines we had crossed. I wasn't thinking about Henry or the guilt that would inevitably follow. All I could focus on was William, his warmth, his touch, the way he made me feel wanted and needed. The night unfolded in a haze of passion and desperation, both of us giving in to what had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. By the time it was over, we lay tangled together, the room silent except for the sound of our breathing. As I rested my head against his chest, the weight of what we had done began to settle in. I knew there would be no undoing this, no going back to the way things were before. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, and the guilt was already starting to creep in. But for now, in the quiet of the night, I let myself feel. I let myself savor the moment, even as I knew it would haunt me in the morning. The day William announced his decision to return abroad marked a turning point, one that filled the house with an air of inevitability. That evening, after Henry had gone to bed, I found William in the living room, seated on the couch, lost in thought. The dim light softened his features, but his eyes betrayed the storm within him. I hesitated at the doorway, but something about the quiet tension between us pulled me closer. "William," I whispered, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression a mix of sorrow and longing. "I had to tell you tonight. I couldn't just leave without saying anything." My heart ached, torn between the guilt of our actions and the undeniable pull I still felt toward him. Before I could stop myself, I sat down beside him, the space between us disappearing in an instant. "You're really leaving?" I said, barely above a whisper. He nodded, his gaze fixed on me. It's the right thing to do, for both of us. But neither of us moved. The air grew heavier, charged with unspoken words and emotions too powerful to contain. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand resting on his. The contact sent a jolt through both of us. His fingers closed around mine, and in that moment, all the barriers we had tried to rebuild crumbled. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice low and filled with restraint. I didn't respond with words. Instead, I leaned in, my lips capturing his in a kiss that was as desperate as it was passionate. He hesitated for a brief moment before surrendering, his hands finding their way to my waist and pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, and soon we were a tangled mess of limbs and emotions, the weight of our impending separation fueling the intensity of the moment. His hands roamed my body, exploring every curve with a reverence that made me ache for more. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice husky as he paused to search my eyes. I nodded, my breath hitching as I whispered, "I need this. I need you." He lifted me effortlessly, carrying me to the couch as our lips never parted. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us and the overwhelming need to be together one last time. As our bodies intertwined, every touch and caress became a silent goodbye, a way to etch each other into our memories forever. He moved with a tenderness that was almost unbearable, his every action conveying a mixture of love, regret, and longing. The hours we spent together felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. When it was over, we lay there in silence, our breaths mingling as we clung to each other. Neither of us wanted to let go, but the weight of reality pressed down on us. Eventually, William sat up, his expression filled with both sorrow and resolve. "This has to be goodbye, Olivia," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I nodded, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I know." He kissed me one last time, a lingering, bittersweet farewell that left me breathless. Then, without another word, he stood and left the room, leaving me alone with the echoes of what we had shared. It had been weeks since William left, but his absence felt like a shadow that lingered in every corner of the house. Henry, true to his promise, had been more present and attentive. Yet, no amount of his effort could erase the vivid memories that kept playing in my mind. Moments of passion, guilt, and the fire that had burned uncontrollably between William and me. I found myself staring at the bedroom ceiling at night, Henry peacefully asleep beside me, his breathing steady. My thoughts would wander to William, his voice, his touch, the way he had looked at me with both desire and restraint. It was an endless conflict. I wanted to bury these memories, but they clung to me like a second skin. One evening, Henry suggested we take a short trip together, just the two of us. He thought a change of scenery would help us reconnect. I agreed, hoping the time away might help me push past the overwhelming guilt and confusion I was carrying. We drove to a quiet lakeside cabin, far from the city. The serenity of the place was breathtaking, the water shimmering under the sunlight, surrounded by lush trees that swayed gently in the breeze. Henry seemed genuinely happy, his smile warm and his eyes filled with affection. For a moment, I felt like the woman I was before the chaos, basking in his love. As we spent time together, cooking meals, sitting by the lake, and talking late into the night, I realized how much Henry had sacrificed for our marriage. He had given up a career he was passionate about to be present for me. This realization struck me deeply, filling me with both gratitude and an unbearable weight of regret. But even in the peaceful embrace of the cabin, William's presence haunted me. At night, as Henry held me close, my mind betrayed me, conjuring up images of William's hands, his lips, his voice. It was a torment I couldn't escape. One afternoon, as Henry and I walked along the lakeshore, he took my hand and stopped. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I know I've been distant in the past. I've made mistakes, but I'm here now and I want us to move forward, together. I want to make you happy again." His words were sincere, and for a moment, I wanted to believe that it was possible to rebuild what we had. But the weight of my betrayal was too great. Could I truly find happiness with Henry when my heart was still tangled with thoughts of another man? The days at the cabin passed in a bittersweet haze. Henry's efforts to rekindle our connection were genuine, and I responded with as much warmth as I could muster. Yet, deep down, I knew I was only giving him fragments of myself. The rest of me was lost in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. When we returned home, life seemed to settle into a routine. Henry continued to prioritize our relationship, and I tried my best to reciprocate. But the memories of William lingered, a constant reminder of the boundaries I had crossed. Months later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was William's. My hands trembled as I opened it, my heart racing. Inside was a simple, heartfelt message that held the weight of our shared experience. "Olivia, I don't know how to put everything into words, but I need you to know that you meant more to me than I ever thought possible. What happened between us is something I will carry with me, not as a regret, but as a reminder of the connection we shared. I don't blame you for anything, and I hope you can find peace in your life. I've decided to move forward and focus on my future, but that doesn't mean I'll ever forget. Take care of yourself. William." The words were bittersweet. They gave me closure while also reopening the wound I was trying to heal. I reread the letter countless times, holding on to the emotions within it, but eventually, I placed it in a drawer and resolved not to revisit it again. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about facing the consequences of my actions and trying to rebuild the life I had chosen with Henry. In the months that followed, I focused on repairing my marriage. Henry had no idea about what had transpired, and I wrestled with the guilt daily. I threw myself into our relationship, trying to be the wife he deserved, while hoping that my efforts could make up for the trust I had broken in my heart. Yet, William's letter remained a quiet reminder, a testament to the moments I had shared with someone who briefly filled the void in my life. His words reminded me of the passion I had sought, and the lines I had crossed. Now, as I sit here recounting this chapter of my life, I realize that no amount of longing or fleeting connection can replace the stability and commitment of a partnership built on trust and understanding. I've learned that addressing the cracks in a relationship head-on is the only way to prevent them from breaking everything apart. To William, wherever he is now, I hope he finds happiness and love that knows no boundaries. And to Henry, I owe everything to his unknowing grace and unwavering love. Life is messy and people are flawed, but what defines us is how we rise after we've fallen. This is the truth I've come to embrace, and it's the truth that continues to guide me as I navigate the path ahead.